The moment he stepped into the lavish mansion, the millionaire father was struck speechless, his little daughter in a torn pink dress trembling as she clutched her newborn baby brother, choking back tears and begging, "Please don't hurt us anymore." That instant, every secret long hidden within the mansion began to shatter. And so began the painful yet courageous journey of a father seeking redemption and of two children reclaiming the warmth they had lost. Before we dive deeper into this moving story, if you believe that stories of love, justice, and healing deserve to be shared, please hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Your support is what allows us to continue bringing you journeys that touch the heart. Now then, let us return to that fateful moment. Millionaire father David Whitaker had just returned from a long business trip, his gleaming luxury car turning onto the familiar road leading to the suburban mansion. For years, this house had been as magnificent as a castle, with its tall iron gates, crystal chandeliers, and marble staircase. But within these walls, a scene awaited him that would shake him to his very core. He opened the door and stepped inside, setting his leather briefcase down on the table. The atmosphere was strange, too quiet, too cold. Then from deep within the house, a trembling sound echoed the muffled cry of a child. David froze in place. His ears strained, his heartbeat pounding like a hammer. Then came his little girl's voice, broken and desperate. "Please don't hurt me and my brother anymore. Please." It was Sophie's voice, his 6-year-old daughter. Since the death of his first wife, Laura, he had rarely been close to her. That plea tore through the silence, pushing David to rush forwards, his heavy steps pounding across the marble floor. He stopped in front of the living room doorway. The sight before him left him speechless. Sophie, dressed in a stained pink dress, clutching her 8-month-old brother Noah tightly to her chest. The baby's face was flushed from crying, his tiny hands grasping at his sister. Standing before them was Melissa Hayes, David's second wife, elegant in a tight red dress. Her blonde curls, carefully styled makeup, flawless. Yet her voice was sharp as a blade. "Shut up. How many times have I told you not to bother me? If you don't listen, I'll throw both of you out on the street." Sophie trembled, holding Noah tighter, her small shoulders shaking with sobs. "Please, don't." "I'll behave." David couldn't hold back any longer. He strode into the room, his voice hoarse yet firm. "Stop it right now, Melissa." He rushed forward, awkwardly cradling Noah after so many months away. Sophie still stood back, her eyes wide, not daring to believe. In that fleeting glance between father and daughter was a mixture of fear and hope. Melissa froze for half a second, then broke into a sweet, false smile, her tone suddenly honeyed. "You're back already. I was just teaching the kids a little discipline. They've been too unruly." Her hand rested lightly on David's sleeve, but in her eyes flashed a sharp, venomous glint. "You've worked so hard. Let me take care of them. The doctor even said children need proper correction." David swallowed hard, his heart aching as he noticed the faint bruise on Sophie's wrist. He sat down heavily, his voice laden with gravity. "Sophie, come here to Daddy." The little girl hesitated, fingers clutching the hem of her dress, her gaze still locked on Melissa as though waiting for permission. David understood. During all these months, he had been absent for far too long. That evening's dinner was lit by warm golden lamps, yet the cold lingered. Melissa sat beside Sophie, smiling sweetly as she placed food onto the girl's plate, while her hand squeezed the child's shoulder, just enough to make her flinch. David saw everything. His heart clenched, and a terrifying question rose in his mind. What have I missed all these months? Could Sophie's desperate plea truly be real? Sophie's eyes still glimmered with fear while Noah whimpered softly in his father's arms. Beneath the sparkling crystal light, David felt for the first time, with piercing clarity behind Melissa's mask of gentleness, lurked a darkness yet to be revealed. That night, when most of the lights in the mansion had gone out, David sat alone in his study. On the desk, stacks of financial documents lay untouched, but he could not focus. Sophie's choked sobs from earlier replayed in his mind like a blade slicing through his heart. He rose and slowly climbed the wooden staircase. Just as his foot landed on the fourth step, a sound made him stop cold. It was Melissa's voice, no longer sweet, but sharp and hissing like a thin knife. "Listen carefully. If you dare breathe a word to your father, I'll throw you and Noah out on the street, and we'll see if anyone pities you." David gripped the railing tightly, his hand trembling until it turned pale. Then he heard Sophie's weak, frightened voice. "But please, don't. I'll stay quiet. I promise." He stood frozen, every muscle locked in place. For the first time, David realized the fear in his daughter's eyes was not an illusion. It was real. He returned to his room, tossing and turning, all night without sleep. As dawn broke, David went down to the kitchen. There, Mrs. Parker, the loyal old housekeeper, was drying dishes. He lowered his voice. "Mrs. Parker, I need you to tell me the truth. When I'm away, what have my children endured?" Mrs. Parker looked up, her wrinkled hands pausing mid-motion. After a long silence, she sighed, her voice trembling. "Sir, many nights Miss Sophie was punished to stand outside on the porch for hours just for dropping a spoon. Once I found her holding baby Noah asleep in the storage room because her bedroom was locked. Little Noah often only had watered-down milk until he cried himself weak. I tried to intervene, but Mrs. Melissa threatened to fire me if I spoke a word." Each word struck him like a hammer to the chest. A vision of Laura, his late wife, flashed in his mind, along with her parting words, "Protect the children. Never abandon them." David bowed his head, his voice thick. "If necessary, would you be willing to testify?" Mrs. Parker lifted her gaze, determination burning in her eyes. "For the children, I would." From that moment, David knew he could no longer remain blind. The entire day, he sought ways to stay close to his children. When Melissa was busy on the phone, he slipped quietly into Sophie's room. The little girl was curled in a corner of the bed, clutching her old teddy bear. Seeing her father, she startled, then timidly tugged her sleeve down to hide the bruise on her wrist. David sat beside her, speaking softly. "Sophie, you don't need to be afraid. Daddy is here now." Her eyes welled with tears but remained lowered. He handed her a cup of warm water and added, "Sit here in the light. It's safe here." Sophie nodded faintly, her hands trembling as she lifted the cup. As her sleeve slipped back, the bruise revealed itself. David's throat tightened, but he pretended not to notice, fearing she would shrink away. Inside, however, a vow formed: I will not let her suffer one more day. That evening, he rocked Noah to sleep. The baby felt feather-light, his breathing labored from hunger. David whispered, "I'm sorry. From now on, you won't cry alone anymore." As he sat beside the crib, Sophie entered holding her teddy bear. She stared at him for a long time, then finally whispered a question that cut him to the core. "Daddy, are you going to leave me, like stepmom says?" David pulled her into his arms, resting his chin on her soft, milk-scented hair. "No, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Sophie burst into tears, tears released at last in the safety of her father's embrace. That night, unable to sleep, David opened Laura's old wardrobe. A letter slipped out. The handwriting, familiar, trembling, spread across the paper. "If I'm no longer here, trust your daughter's eyes. When she's afraid, she won't know how to hide it. Protect Sophie and Noah at all costs." When he finished reading, David sank to the floor, tears falling onto the letter. In the darkness, he clutched the paper to his chest and whispered, "Laura, I've failed too long, but from today, I will keep my promise." The next day, David did not go to work as usual. He sent word to the office that he needed to deal with family matters, then quietly stayed behind at the mansion. From the morning he walked through every corner of the house, observing each detail: scratches on the stair railing, a dusty lock on the outside of a door, splattered traces of milk in the storage room. Each mark felt like an invisible accusation. In the children's room, David opened the wardrobe. He found a few of Sophie's old dresses, the cuffs frayed and stained with faint purple marks. In a drawer, Noah's baby bottle still carried the faint, watery smell of diluted milk. David clenched his fists, his chest heavy. "I need evidence. I can't rely on feelings alone," he muttered, reminding himself. By noon, Melissa, in a floral dress, strolled through the garden with her phone pressed to her ear. David happened to overhear her low voice, calculated and sharp. "Yes, Caleb, meet me at the back gate this afternoon. I'll bring the documents. We need to move quickly before David suspects." The name Caleb made David's senses flare. He quietly followed, hiding behind the trees. Within minutes, a strange man slipped through the side gate. He wore a dark coat and carried a thin folder. Melissa spoke briskly. "Here's the marriage certificate and some copies. I need the transfer of control over the family trust as soon as possible." Caleb frowned. "But we'll need David's authorization signature. That won't be easy." "Don't worry, I'll find a way. He's too busy playing the devoted father." Every word burned in David's ears, his face flushed with fury. It wasn't just child abuse. Melissa was scheming to steal his fortune. That night he called an old friend, Thomas Reynolds, a lawyer who had stood by him in many major deals. "Thomas, I need you at my house tomorrow evening. It's not business, it's family, and it's serious." There was a pause on the other end before a firm reply. "Understood. I'll come. Notebook in hand." When the call ended, David turned to Sophie. She was on the rug, stacking blocks for Noah. Fear flickered in her eyes when Melissa passed by, but when she glanced toward her father, a spark of hope lit up. David stepped closer, gently resting his hand on her shoulder. "Daddy's here. You don't have to worry." Sophie nodded faintly, her lips trembling before she whispered, "Just 2 words, thank you." The next evening, the dining table was set, elegantly, candles glowing. Melissa played the perfect hostess, her sweetness so forced it was suffocating. She smiled constantly at their guest. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Reynolds." She cooed, personally serving Sophie food, but David saw her other hand press sharply into the girl's shoulder, making Sophie flinch, her spoon rattling. He clenched his teeth, holding back. Thomas glanced over, catching the odd moment, but stayed quiet. Throughout dinner, Melissa steered every topic toward investments, feigning interest in the children. But when she bent close to Sophie, her whisper cut like ice. "Remember what I said. If you talk, Noah pays the price." Sophie froze, eyes downcast. David saw it all. He set his glass down firmly, his tone calm yet commanding. "Tomorrow, I want Thomas to review all of our family trust documents." Melissa stiffened briefly, then forced a smile. "Of course, darling, financial security comes first." When dinner ended, Melissa took Noah upstairs, Sophie trailing behind. Left in the living room, Thomas lowered his voice. "David, I didn't just hear money talk. I saw the child shrink in fear. Tell me the truth." David nodded heavily, recounting Sophie's desperate plea, the bruises, the nights locked outside, and the scheme he had overheard with Caleb. Thomas scribbled notes, eyes steady on his friend. "If you can secure Mrs. Parker's testimony plus proof of Melissa's dealings with Caleb, we can request an emergency protective order from the court." David's fist tightened, his voice like stone. "I'll do whatever it takes. I won't let my children live another day in fear." That night, entering the bedroom, David found Sophie sitting on the bed, clutching her teddy bear, eyes wide open in the dark. He sat gently beside her. "Sophie, Daddy promises no one will ever hurt you or your brother again." The girl's voice trembled. "Daddy, will you really stay?" David leaned down, embracing both children at once. "I'll be here, and I'll protect you." In that moment, Laura's words from her letter echoed crystal clear. "Trust your daughter's eyes. She cannot hide her fear. Protect Sophie and Noah at all costs." David knew then the true battle had begun. 2 days later, the morning at Lincoln County Courthouse began with the smell of old paper and the echo of hurried footsteps down the hallway. David gripped Sophie's hand tightly while beside him, lawyer Thomas Reynolds carried a thick stack of files. In David's chest, each heartbeat pounded like a war drum. Across the aisle, Melissa Hayes appeared in a pale dress, her makeup carefully applied to give an air of fragility. At her side was attorney Martin Blake, his expression cold and severe. Melissa dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, playing the role of the misunderstood, devoted stepmother. The clerk read aloud, "Case number 27F, Whitaker petition for emergency protection of 2 minor children." The entire room stood as Judge Catherine Brooks entered. In her 50s, her sharp eyes and stern demeanor commanded immediate silence. Thomas rose, his voice steady and clear. "Your Honor, we request an emergency protective order suspending the guardianship rights of Mrs. Melissa Hayes based on evidence of both psychological and physical abuse against the 2 children." Martin immediately countered, "Your Honor, these accusations are baseless. My client is a devoted stepmother who has taken care of her husband's children in his frequent absence. Children fall, children bruise, it is normal." Melissa lowered her head, sobbing softly. "I've done everything I could. My husband is away for months on business. I've borne all the burden alone." David squeezed Sophie's hand tighter. Her small palm was ice cold. The first witness called was Mrs. Parker. The elderly woman, silver-haired, slowly stepped to the stand, her hands clasped together. Her voice trembled but was firm. "I've seen little Sophie punished to stand outside on the porch for hours. One night I found her sleeping in the storage room with baby Noah in her arms because her bedroom was locked. Noah was often fed only watered-down milk until he cried himself weak. I heard Mrs. Melissa threaten to throw both children out if Sophie told her father." Martin arched a brow, pressing her. "How old are you? How reliable is your memory? Do you hold any personal grudge against my client?" Mrs. Parker answered calmly, "I'm 62 years old. I've worked in that house for 10 years since Mrs. Laura was alive. I cannot mistake Melissa's voice, and I bear no grudge, only the desire to protect the children." The judge nodded, jotting notes. Thomas then presented photographs of the bruises on Sophie's wrists. He also placed before the court Laura's final letter, reading slowly, "This letter may not be legal evidence, but it shows the will of the children's biological mother to protect them from any harm." Judge Brooks read in silence, the tension in the room wound tight like a string. Martin snapped back, "Children bruise while playing. This letter is nothing but emotion, not proof." At that, Thomas lifted his chin. Then perhaps the court should hear directly from the child. David turned to Sophie, kneeling, to whisper, "You don't have to be afraid. Daddy's right here." Sophie's small frame shook as she stepped to the stand. The clerk bent down to ask her name and age. "Sophie Whitaker, 6 years old." Judge Brooks softened her tone. "You only need to tell the truth. No one here can hurt you." Sophie clutched her teddy bear tightly, then spoke in a faint voice. She said she'd throw me and Noah on the street if I told Daddy. But I don't want my brother to grow up scared anymore." Her voice broke at the end, but in her eyes shone a flicker of courage. In the gallery below, David lifted a hand to his face, tears spilling over. Martin shot to his feet, protesting, "Children's words cannot be trusted. They are easily influenced." The judge struck her gavel. "Enough. The child's testimony will be recorded." Melissa suddenly leapt up, pointing at Sophie, shrieking, "She's lying. She's just like her mother always, pretending to be saintly." The courtroom gasped. Security officers rushed forward, forcing her back into her seat. After nearly 2 hours of testimony and arguments, Judge Brooks spoke in a firm, measured tone. Based on witness testimony, photographic evidence of injury, the child's account, and the threatening conduct in this very courtroom, the court hereby suspends all guardianship rights of Mrs. Melissa Hayes. Temporary custody is granted to Mr. David Whitaker. Furthermore, the matter will be referred to the district attorney's office for further investigation into abuse and financial fraud. The gavel struck, echoing through the chamber. Melissa collapsed into her chair, her face twisted with rage. David wrapped his arms around Sophie, feeling at last the warmth return to her little hand. He whispered, voice trembling, "Daddy's here. No one will ever make you afraid again." Behind them, Mrs. Parker's eyes glistened with tears while Thomas gave a quiet nod. The legal battle had reached its first victory, yet David knew this was only the beginning of a long journey to protect his children. 2 years had passed since that fateful day in court. The suburban mansion now carried an entirely different atmosphere. The pure laughter of children once again echoed through every corner of the yard. In the morning, the sun bathed the back garden in golden light. The tomato plants stood tall and green, supported by sturdy wooden stakes. A small wooden sign hung on the freshly painted white fence, bearing a simple inscription, "Laura's Garden." David sat on an old wooden chair, a notebook resting on his lap. His eyes followed a familiar scene. Sophie, now 8 years old, her hair tied up, holding little Noah's hand as he toddled along the red brick path. Sophie bent down, her voice full of excitement. "Look, Noah, the tomato flowers are blooming. You have to touch them gently, don't break them." Noah giggled, his tiny hand brushing the tender stem. In that moment, David was carried back to the night. Sophie had trembled and pleaded, "Please don't hurt us." That haunting memory had now transformed into radiant smiles in the middle of a flourishing garden. He closed his eyes, gratitude swelling quietly in his heart. "Laura, I kept my promise." In Sophie's arms was still the old teddy bear. Though worn and frayed, she carried it everywhere, a witness to the journey she had survived. She sat beside her father, leaning her head lightly against his shoulder. "Daddy, are we having pasta with the first tomatoes today?" David smiled, his warm hand resting on her small shoulder. "Of course. And you'll be my sous chef." Noah toddled over, holding out a tiny stone like a treasure. "For you, Daddy." David laughed heartily, slipping the stone into his shirt pocket as though it were a gem. Each gesture from his son stitched together the broken pieces of his heart. A familiar voice called from the back gate, "Hello, Whitaker family." It was Carla Rivera, the social worker who had stood by them through the case. She stepped in, holding a thin folder. Carla smiled and handed David a paper. "This is the confirmation Sophie's therapy program is complete. Noah is developing normally, too." David clasped Carla's hand, his eyes brimming. "Thank you for everything." Carla shook her head gently, her gaze warm. "The credit is yours. You stayed. You listened to them." Sophie ran over and wrapped her arms around her father. Noah squeezed in too nearly, toppling them all. Laughter rippled through the garden. That afternoon in the kitchen, Sophie stood on a small stool washing ripe red tomatoes. Noah counted strands of dry pasta, lining them up like train tracks on the table. David sautéed garlic in the pan, the aroma filling the room. The sight of his small family bustling together lifted a weight from his chest, as if the years of darkness had never existed. When dinner was served, Sophie stood straight, pretending to be a little announcer. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's special Whitaker family pasta with tomato sauce from Mom Laura's garden." Noah clapped loudly, and David burst into joyous laughter. In that instant, he knew without doubt this was his greatest wealth. As night fell, Sophie cuddled her teddy bear, resting her head on her father's shoulder. "Daddy, now we're really a family, right?" David gathered both children in his arms, his eyes misting. "Yes, and we always will be." Outside, the breeze swayed the tomato vines, the ties holding them firm, strong enough to support, never to choke. On the wooden shelf in the living room, Laura's photo smiled gently. Under the golden glow of the lamp, it seemed like a silent blessing. David whispered softly, "Laura, I did it. I kept my promise." The story closes in the garden at dusk, where the shadows of father and children stretched across the grass. 3 figures merged into one, steady and at peace. Today's story comes to a close, but the lesson remains. It only took one father willing to truly listen for 2 children to be rescued from the shadows. And what about you in Sophie and Noah's journey? Which moment touched your heart most? The trembling plea, Laura's letter, or David's vow in court? And if you yourself encountered a child sending out a silent cry for help, what would you do? Share your thoughts in the comments so we can reflect together and spread the meaning of this story. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next heartfelt journeys. Every bit of support from you is the driving force that keeps us telling stories that touch the soul. While you wait for the next video, take a moment of peace for yourself. Drink some water. Rest. And if you can, hug your loved ones. We've also prepared a few other stories that are sure to touch your heart. They're showing right next to this one. Click and continue walking with us on these journeys full of emotion and hope. Wishing you a day filled with peace and warmth alongside your family.